Hello and welcome to Classical Music on Mushrooms. This is a podcast where we explore all things unspoken in the classical music world. As a classical singer myself, I am tired of hiding behind this veil of perfectionism, superficiality, and let's be real, all the bullshit. That's just not who I am. I'm excited to dive deep into taboo topics that are oftentimes shied away from or completely ignored in classical music spaces. So with that, let's get deep and have a good fucking time. Quick trigger warning, this episode will briefly be discussing disordered eating and body shaming. If that is something that triggers you, this episode might not be for you. Going into this conversation, I want to be clear that I don't speak for all fat people. These are just my thoughts and opinions on the subject. I acknowledge that conversations like this require nuance, and it is never my intention to offend anyone. I also acknowledge that a lot of people may have different opinions, and I respect that. These hard conversations need to be had if we want to make the opera world a more compassionate place. Fatphobia is described as an irrational fear of, aversion to, or discrimination against obesity or people with obesity. As a plus-size woman myself, this topic hits close to home. I've experienced fatphobia my whole life, from strangers to family members, and even my own mentors. One of my more vivid childhood memories is me walking home from the bus stop and a man across the street hollering at me, yelling, "fat ass," and his friend laughing. I also have memories of family members calling me a pig as I ate when I was very young. If you are plus size, you most likely have stories of your own. When it came to my experience as a young singer, I recall my first voice teacher pulling my parents aside to tell them that I should lose weight. To more recently, comments from my own mentors, whom I deeply, deeply respect, telling me that I have to cover my arms and knees in audition settings. In this podcast, I will be discussing trends in the opera world that exclude and shame fat people, as well as first-hand experiences from plus-size individuals about their experiences with fatphobia. I will also be offering my own opinions and solutions towards the end of this episode. First, I want to thank the middle-class artists for publishing excellent articles regarding these topics. I will make sure to leave all of these sources in the description of this podcast. As the middle-class artist states, opera audiences don't often question why they only see straight-sized individuals depicting roles in operas. What they don't see is the discrimination behind the scenes. In case you are unfamiliar with the term, straight-sized is referring to those with a body weight that is socially acceptable, usually under a size 10. So you might be asking yourself, what discrimination? Where? As you might have noticed, popular media and even Broadway are casting more and more plus-sized individuals. This is because they, like most people, like money. And there's a lot of fat people in the world, and they want to see themselves being represented in the media. So why isn't this happening in opera? It's because of people like Diane Zola, who is just one of hundreds of gatekeepers in the opera pipeline for North American singers, and who has since retired from her high-ranking positions at the Metropolitan Opera in late 2021. If it was not for her decision to retire, I honestly might hesitate to call her out by name, because I'm a young singer just trying to make it in the opera world. She is a good example of the opera industry holding singers back from careers because of their size. She was executive director of the Lindenman Young Artist Program at the Metropolitan Opera, and she was often a judge in prestigious competitions such as the Metropolitan Opera National Council auditions. It's people like her that young singers look to in order to aid them in their journey to success in the opera world. She is reported by many to making discriminating comments in judging feedback sessions. Here are just some of what she is reported as saying to young singers. "You need to wear more supportive undergarments because I can see your rolls underneath your dress. Your biggest issue is your weight. What do you eat?" And then that followed by, "You eat too much." I think if you're going to wear anything to an audition, you just need to make sure your arm fat isn't sticking out. I don't know if you are a physically active person. You don't support. Do you exercise? Do you run? Do you walk? And lastly, I have to be straightforward. You are a tenor, and tenors often sing the roles of the lover in an opera. If you are going to ever be successful in this business, you have to lose a significant amount of weight. We would be here for quite a while if I read all of the horrific body shaming comments she is reported as saying to these young singers. And these are just the reported ones. One can assume that many singers did not feel empowered to come forward with these stories, and a lot of these singers chose to remain anonymous out of fear of retaliation. To be clear, these quotes were often followed by praise for the singer's artistry and musicianship, and it really goes to show that if these singers were straight-sized, their bodies would not be a part of the conversation. If they lacked support in their singing, for example, perhaps questions of their technique would come up. They would not be interrogated for possibly living a sedentary lifestyle. I also want to be clear that Diane Zola is merely a symptom of a fatphobic norm that we see in the opera world. For those of you that may be thinking that Zola is only looking out for these singers' well-being, I have a section specifically for those of you in favor of this type of body policing later in this podcast, so stay tuned for that. To bring it back to my own experience, remember how I mentioned that my own mentors told me to cover my arms and knees in auditions? Zola is reported as saying the exact same thing to plus-size singers, often adding that larger arms are quote-unquote distracting. Girl, I'm about to be out here purposely buying sleeveless audition dresses just to make people like her uncomfortable. To quote the middle-class artist, there's a powerful group of gatekeepers who belong to a specific generation that engage in fat shaming, racism, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, all of that. And they are all a part of the game, making up the rules as they play.